So you came on board in 2011, correct? But they started in 2008, so you weren't here for the first 3 years.
I was not.
So what was the story like? Like if I was sitting across from Janet right now, she was telling the story of how she started this. What would she say?
Yeah, it's funny. We joke about this story all the time. So when I came, I had moved back to New Orleans because my wife and I weren't here for Katrina. Around the time when Liberty Teaching got started, my wife and I were actually in Pennsylvania, where I got my second degree that I had mentioned, and my wife was getting her master's degree.
Okay.
And we'd moved back. When Katrina happened, we wanted to give New Orleans about a year, and we had just had a baby, and we wanted to come back and be part of what New Orleans was going to become, because there was all this buzzword and branding around what will the new Orleans look like, and we wanted to come back and be part of reestablishing some of what old New Orleans was before it got kind of waylaid and tossed to the side, because there's a lot of great things that we both resonated with. Yeah. Right. So we moved back and we tried to find opportunities. I was in education for a while. I was in acting for a while.
Yeah.
All those things far and few and in between, with trying to also raise a family. So I was looking for something more steady and something that kind of honed all of my resume into one space. And when I met with this organization, I had my initial interview. And I think that at the time, I know at the time, Janet was in some level of transition. Like, she was hiring for a front of house manager for her restaurant space, a small restaurant space. But I think she was also, in the back of her mind, she was transitioning how the organization could develop into something different, something new, something the next level of her dream. And when I interviewed, it was funny. They looked at me and they thought my resume was a bit too extensive for the job, yet I had no front of house experience, like, until back when I was like in high school and I was working at like Cafe Du Monde. Okay. Something like that. And but they appreciated meeting me. They appreciated the interaction. And I didn't think, and I thought I didn't get the job because it's that typical overqualified thing. Yeah. But turns out I got a phone call later that day and said, hey, you know what? Our executive director wants to meet you. She wants to actually come in and meet you. You don't necessarily qualify for the job that we currently have, but we told her about you, and she thinks that there's a space that we may be able to create that speaks to your resume. So I said, okay. Came in, and I'll never forget it. I walked in, it was a coffee shop, and I see the two guys I interviewed with, a person of color and a white guy. And there was this woman sitting there, tall white woman from Texas. And I said, here we go again. Another white lady who wants to save, the young black people of New Orleans. So I'm walking right back into the same thing that I see every time. And literally within 20 minutes of the conversation with this woman, she said she was impressed with my resume. She had heard my name from some people that she knew. She heard about the initial interview that I had about what I could bring to the table to make Liberty's Kitchen better. And she told me her story about why she started Liberty's Kitchen. And this white woman from Texas was using words like racial bias, racism. She wasn't skirting around it. She wasn't calling it classism, and she wasn't calling it. She wasn't denying the fact that systemic racism was real. Mm-hmm. And again, this is 10 years ago. Yeah. When people weren't talking about systemic racism because it was made up. You know, which now we know to be very much real, or we talk about it if it's very much tangent. But she was talking about all of it, and just there was an honesty and almost a frustration in her. And I was like, you weren't using the term woke at the time, but she got it. Yeah. And I clicked and connected with this woman. I was like, holy crap, this woman is actually not only saying that she knows what's wrong, but she also knows that she's not the person to fix it. And she wants more dynamic people of color to come to the space and diversify her space and make it a place where more young people of color feel comfortable, feel connected. And she thought I could bring that to the table.
So why is that important, a keystone to making improvements, having a person of color take the lead?
I think it's like anything, it's understanding. I advocate all day long for the rights and equalities of different types of people, LGBT communities as well, but I would never get on stage and speak about what laws need to change to hold up that community, because I don't know directly what that community suffers or deals with every day, and it's not my role. My role is to hear them and support any injustices that they may come across to support. I think it's the same thing when you talk about people of color. I think all too often, especially as our young people don't see, are examples of success.
Yeah.
So many of our young people, especially young people of color, they are not given access to go beyond their means. So they don't know more than their neighborhood or their surroundings or their circles. And then the rest of what they have to use to fill in the gap is controlled by media, it's controlled by perception of others who are not like them or people of color. And you need a caveat, you need something to cancel out that narrative so you can show to a young person of color, hey, look, I know that there's this idea that you are just a young criminal out of the gate, you're lazy, you have no interest in being employed, all you want to do is smoke weed all day, all of whatever the ridiculous scenarios are. And as a white person, you can go in a room and say, that's not all black people. And stonewall. It's like, how would you know? You don't know where we come from. You don't know what we do. And even though I don't pretend to resonate with all of the young people that come through this program and what they've had to deal with, I do understand how the lens of the world captures them. And I understand how they're affected by that. I was lucky. I had a lot of means growing up. I had, again, as I mentioned, a very supportive familial community and people who supported me. But because I know that, I can speak to how it works in the black community, and I can speak to people who don't have it and hopefully find opportunities for them to understand how to either navigate around it or find substitutions for it, but to be able to deal with it on the same level that they see it or they deal with it. And I think that's why it's important.
Okay. So it sounds like in the early days, Liberty's Kitchen, the mission, and it's still to this day, was to give young people a perspective to say that you're not defined by what society says you might be. You're defined by whatever, there is opportunity, the same opportunity out there. And so what was Liberty trying to do? Like, how exactly, what was the approach going to be back then? Is it still the same case today? Are you still taking the same approach? Has it evolved at all?
I think it has evolved on a more of a microcosm level. When Janet really started it, it was, she had in her own, and this is another thing that related her to me, like she told her story from her point of view and why it motivated her into a lot of this work. She had studied a lot about sociology. She had seen a lot of racism growing up, grown up in Midland, Texas, in the early 50s and 60s. I mean, she had seen racism. She knew it was real. There was no doubt about it. But when she had gotten to college and she had learned and she had studied and she read up, she recognized that it was something that the world was going through, especially America was going through. And she had experienced it in her own not racism per se, but she knew what it was to be the remainder, the outlier, because again, she was a woman, and in the 60s in Midland, Texas, trying to be a woman in big oil in a big company, it was like Mad Men. You know what I'm saying? You weren't, your opinions weren't really taken. Your leadership was looked at as hollow because again, you're a woman and a man is better than you. So she spoke to inequality in that level. So while she understood inequality, and understood that inequality also existed on a racial level, she knew she wasn't the person. She used what she had, her authority, her power, her network, to create a space to break that down or to get in its way. And she knew she needed to arm it with the right people. And she was beginning to make those choices. I wasn't the only black person she hired, but she definitely resonated with the fact that I was a person of color who resonated with what she wanted this organization to be. And that is a beacon of understanding that when she started it, she understood that young black youth were not getting a fair shake. Particularly young black youth coming out of a system, coming out of the judicial system. Because when she started this, it was all about young people who were coming out of court, who were criminalized to begin with, marginalized, disenfranchised for whatever reason. It wasn't their fault per se. And you look at the factors, the outlying factors that lead a lot of young people of color into those systems. So it's actually a denial of other things that cause that. It's the pipeline to prison. If you've ever
Can we
heard
get
it.
into it? I feel like it's worth getting into it because all that's going on right now. Like, let's try to understand. Like, let's use this opportunity and the echoing that's happening in society right now is just listen, just try to understand why we got into this situation. So explain it. Like, what was happening that a resource like Liberty's Kitchen needed to exist?
I mean, at the time, and it still is the fact of the case that New Orleans is one of the most largely by percentage, one of the most heavily incarcerated cities in all of the country. I think Louisiana leads the pack as far as the states, but New Orleans as a city is one of the most incarcerating cities on all of the world, from what I understand. And the marginal disparities of who is in prison is I believe it's like upwards of, I have to check my research, but it's upwards of 85% black.
Okay.
It may be between 60 or 75, but it's still a disparagingly high number.
Exactly.
And it's dangerous and reckless to believe that percentage of the population is criminal at best. So what's happening, right? Well, why is that the case? And it points to the fact that the system is unjust. I mean, you can see it now when you look at thanks to Facebook posts and media, that when you see the sentencing that's happening for young people of color versus what's happening for young white males, it's hugely disparate, and it's not the same at all. And black people by far are getting harsher and more readily sentencings that will incarcerate them for longer periods of time. And it's punitive. It's extremely punitive and excessive. And a lot of times it's not warranted. I mean, so many of our young people say they get picked up for things that they didn't do. Cases get thrown out. They get arrested. They get pulled over, stopped on the side. Things like we're talking about, seeing now every day.
Yeah.
Is our populations, is what they exist in. And when you're embedded in a system like that, or when you're constantly being berated by a system like that, you don't feel like you're anything but that.
Thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed today's video, please like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. And don't forget, there's a complete archive of every episode at restaurantunstoppable.com. Peace.